Tonight, the beekeeping industry is in crisis over the shocking and hundreds of millions of bees over the last 8 months.
Millions of living bees were released into the Nevada desert, and no one knew if they would survive. The land was silent.
Without a desert ecosystem, this is just Nevada's just a pile of dust, and we actually know it's an amazing biodiverse place, and that insects are the cornerstone of those ecosystems.
Then it began to change. Within weeks, patterns emerged beneath the heat, hives forming where nothing should live, collapses where life was guaranteed. Scientists expected failure. What they documented instead rewrote assumptions about survival, balance, and control.
There's sort of, more opportunity for beekeepers to have larger operations, but there has to be land that can support those bees for the rest of the year.
Because after 1 month, the desert didn't kill the bees, it answered them. The native bees. Beneath Nevada's cracked and sun-baked soil lies a world almost no traveler notices. It hides in tiny openings no wider than a pencil tip, scattered across ground that seems empty at first glance. These hidden tunnels belong to the native bees of the region, creatures shaped perfectly by the harsh land they inhabit. They do not swarm in hives or fill the air with constant motion. Instead, they emerge one by one, each moving alone, guided by instincts honed over countless seasons. Nevada hosts hundreds of these species, each adapted to survive in extreme conditions. They carve out burrows deep enough to escape the intense heat above. The soil becomes both fortress and shelter, allowing them to endure challenges that would overwhelm bees from more temperate climates. Their quiet, solitary existence keeps them almost invisible to casual observers. Yet their presence is steady, woven into the rhythms of the desert in ways most people never perceive. Among these specialized species is the alkali bee, which prefers salt-rich soils for its home. While most creatures avoid such harsh terrain, the alkali bee thrives within it. It tunnels into mineral-packed earth, forming chambers that remain stable despite extreme temperature swings. When the moment arrives, it emerges confidently, knowing exactly where to find the plants that depend on its precision and timing. Though small, these bees wield influence across vast landscapes. Native plants coordinate their blooms with remarkable accuracy, opening only during short periods when moisture appears. In those fleeting windows, the bees move efficiently from flower to flower, transferring pollen with exacting precision. Without their work, many plants would fail to reproduce, leaving the desert even more barren than it already appears. This hidden partnership unveils a side of Nevada few ever imagine. What seems empty on the surface is actually alive with cycles that are easy to miss. Underground nests wait quietly for safe conditions. Plants store energy until rain arrives. Bees respond to subtle cues, knowing when the season has begun. Everything moves in harmony, as if the land itself has taught its inhabitants to survive through careful timing. Seeing this world transforms the way the desert is perceived. What once appeared lifeless becomes alive with unseen activity. The bees prove that even the harshest landscapes can sustain intricate ecosystems. They challenge the assumption that deserts cannot support delicate creatures. In truth, these species have mastered their environment over generations of adaptation. Yet even this steady world faces danger. The bees that have learned to navigate heat, drought, and scarcity still contend with threats that have followed them through time. These challenges shape their lives and test their survival. Now those ancient pressures are returning, preparing the stage for a struggle that reaches far beyond the confines of their hidden burrows. Competition, collapse, and the pollination crisis. The arrival of honeybees, brought in for agricultural purposes, has added an unexpected pressure to the desert's hidden world.
Saving the bees, an effort underway to help these pollinators.
Mary Jan Bayesa explains what Assembly Bill 221 would do and the role bees play in southern Nevada.
Unlike the native bees that move silently and carefully through the terrain, honeybees travel in numbers large enough to dominate every available flower. Studies show that they can remove up to 80% of pollen in a given area, leaving almost nothing for the species that have called these lands home for centuries. The imbalance is subtle at first, but over time it reshapes the way plants reproduce and the way native pollinators survive. For the solitary desert bees, every bloom is a lifeline. Each flower they visit provides the pollen and nectar needed to sustain their underground nests and future generations. When honeybees take most of the resources, the native species are forced to work harder or risk losing the next generation entirely. The desert has always demanded careful timing, precise movement, and an intimate knowledge of where resources will appear. Introducing competition on such a scale disrupts all of that, creating a fragile imbalance where survival depends on chance and speed rather than skill. The effects on the plants themselves are equally significant. Many desert species rely on native bees for pollination. Flowers that bloom too briefly or too sparsely may fail to reproduce if their visitors cannot reach them. Over time, this can reduce genetic diversity, weaken populations, and even threaten some plants with disappearance. In an ecosystem already defined by scarcity, the consequences of competition ripple outward, touching every creature that depends on these fragile networks. The story of millions of bees entering the desert taps into this reality in a dramatic way. Even if the viral accounts are unverified, the anxiety they create is rooted in truth. People are aware that pollinators around the world are declining, yet most do not fully grasp the scale of the problem or how delicately species depend on one another. The imagined invasion of bees magnifies that concern, turning a rumor into a symbol of what could happen if these systems fail completely. In this environment, the line between myth and fact begins to blur. It is easy to imagine the bees vanishing, the plants struggling, and the ecosystem teetering on collapse. The narrative feels plausible because it reflects real pressures in an extraordinary setting. The desert's hidden pollinators already operate on the edge, and adding a new player, one capable of overwhelming the existing balance, raises questions about what might survive and what might vanish. To fully grasp the stakes, it is necessary to examine the rare and imperiled species that rely on precise timing and undisturbed conditions. These bees are not just small insects moving among flowers. They are keystones in a system shaped over centuries, species whose survival is interwoven with plants that bloom only once or twice a year. Observing their vulnerability shows just how fragile the desert's networks can be, and why even a small change in resources or timing can trigger consequences that echo across the entire ecosystem. The Mojave's dying pollinator. In the heart of the Mojave, a tiny bee holds power far beyond its size. The Mojave poppy bee was once a quiet constant, moving through the desert, visiting flowers that depend on it entirely. Today, it survives in only a handful of pockets, scattered across the arid land. Each remaining population feels precarious, as though a single season of drought or disruption could erase it entirely. Its decline is not just about one species vanishing. It signals the fragility of an entire ecosystem that has relied on these pollinators for centuries. The flowers it visits are as specialized as the bee itself. Some bloom for only a few days each year, releasing their pollen in exacting amounts that match the bee's life cycle. Without the Mojave poppy bee, these blossoms fail to reproduce, and the desert slowly loses more than color and texture. It loses the intricate connections that allow life to continue in a place that demands precision and timing. The disappearance of one pollinator begins a chain reaction, touching everything else that depends on the rhythm of blooms and the presence of insects that carry pollen from one flower to the next. These fragile links reveal how delicate desert ecosystems are, more fragile than anyone passing through might imagine. A region that seems vast and empty is actually a network of interdependence, where every creature, plant, and even the soil itself relies on careful balance. When that balance is disrupted, the consequences can unfold quickly and silently, sometimes going unnoticed until too much has already shifted. The Mojave poppy bee is a warning, a living sign that even small losses carry enormous weight. As the bees' populations shrink, conservationists watch closely, aware that each action, or inaction, matters. Protecting the remaining habitats requires precise understanding of soil conditions, flowering cycles, and temperature patterns that guide the bees' emergence. The work is painstaking, the challenge is constant. Every field survey, every restoration effort reveals the delicate margins that define survival here. These measures are more than protection. They are a race against time, attempting to maintain the balance before it slips beyond repair. The stakes are clear. When keystone pollinators like the Mojave poppy bee face extinction, the desert's broader ecosystem feels the strain. Plants fail to reproduce, other species lose sources of food, and the carefully timed cycles that define desert life falter. One tiny bee becomes the fulcrum for survival, and the question lingers. What happens when the creatures that hold the desert together begin to vanish? Before we confront that reality, it is necessary to explore the efforts already underway. Real restoration work, guided by careful observation, science, and the quiet determination to keep the desert alive. Science in action. Nevada is slowly shifting its approach to the creatures that quietly sustain its deserts. For the first time, wildlife action plans officially include bees and butterflies, acknowledging their critical role in keeping ecosystems alive.
Which would protect bees and butterflies under the wildlife classification in Nevada.
These tiny pollinators are no longer overlooked as mere background players. They are recognized as essential threads in the complex web of desert life, and the state is beginning to treat their survival with the urgency it demands. Universities and research centers have stepped into the gap, hosting conferences and community events that bring scientists, students, and residents together. These gatherings focus on pollinator health, offering insight into species that most people rarely encounter. Attendees learn to identify native bees, track their movements, and understand the subtle timing of desert blooms. The knowledge shared in these spaces helps to illuminate the hidden activity that otherwise goes unnoticed, creating a growing network of informed observers who can spot problems before they escalate. Citizen science programs take this effort further, inviting volunteers to track bee populations across the state. From recording the appearance of rare species to mapping nesting sites, these projects fill gaps that formal research alone cannot reach. Each observation adds a piece to the puzzle of how bees survive in a place where water is scarce and floral resources are fleeting. Collectively, these efforts reveal the true scale of the challenge. The desert is alive with activity, but that life depends on constant monitoring and intervention to maintain its balance. What emerges from these initiatives is a subtle realization. The real experiment is not in releasing millions of bees into a desert or attempting dramatic interventions. It is in the ongoing work to understand and protect these creatures in ways that respect the delicate systems they inhabit. Supporting pollinators requires patience, observation, and a willingness to let the ecosystem guide human decisions rather than imposing quick fixes. This is the kind of experiment that unfolds over months and years, quietly shaping outcomes without fanfare or spectacle. The work also highlights just how little most people understand about desert life. Bees here do not follow familiar patterns from gardens and orchards. Their lives are governed by precise timing, the brief opening of blooms, and the hidden networks of soil tunnels and microhabitats. Conservation efforts reveal these rhythms to the people willing to look closely, showing that the desert is far more active and intricate than it appears from the surface. Understanding this foundation is essential before considering the next step. Protecting pollinators is one thing, but living in the desert requires more than protection. It requires the ability to navigate the environment, find fleeting resources, and survive where conditions change in an instant. To grasp the full story, it is necessary to examine how bees make a living in a landscape that seems hostile at first glance, but hides countless opportunities for those adapted to its rhythm. Bees at the mercy of the sands. In the Nevada desert, life unfolds in patterns invisible to most eyes. Bees emerge only when the desert allows, often after rare rainfall that triggers the sudden appearance of blossoms. Their activity is brief, almost fleeting, as if the land itself dictates when they may rise. Each pollinator knows exactly which plants to visit, moving with precision shaped over generations. Survival in this environment is a careful negotiation between timing, opportunity, and instinct. Some bees form astonishingly close bonds with individual plants. The desert pallid bee, for example, depends almost entirely on certain host trees. Its life cycle is synchronized with the flowering of these trees, ensuring that its emergence coincides with the brief window of opportunity for pollen transfer. If the blooms appear too early or too late, the bee risks missing the critical moment. The plants, in turn, rely on these precise visits to reproduce. It is a fragile dance, orchestrated quietly by the desert itself, with consequences rippling across the ecosystem when steps are missed. Desert blooms do not happen on a fixed schedule like in temperate regions. One year may bring a flush of flowers, while the next passes with barely a trace of life above ground. Bees must be ready to act immediately when opportunity arrives, or their entire generation could fail. It is a rhythm dictated not by humans, but by rainfall, temperature, and subtle cues embedded in the land. Because of this unpredictability, any attempt to intervene carries profound uncertainty. Introducing new bees or shifting populations could easily disrupt these delicate patterns. A bee arriving too early might find no blooms, while one arriving too late might encounter competition that overwhelms the native species. The desert's ecosystem is balanced on a knife edge, and even small disturbances can cascade through plants, pollinators, and the animals that depend on them. Human activity, however well-intentioned, rarely accounts for the full complexity of these interactions. Understanding this precision makes the idea of releasing millions of bees all the more striking. The desert does not operate like a garden. Its cycles are brief, highly specific, and unforgiving. Any large-scale introduction could collide with these natural rhythms, leaving consequences that are impossible to predict. The thought of suddenly flooding this system with massive numbers of pollinators highlights both the power and fragility of the desert, raising the question of what might actually happen when a perfectly balanced web faces an overwhelming force. What science suggests would happen. If millions of bees were suddenly placed into a desert, science predicts consequences far different from what viral videos imply. Desert ecosystems operate on razor-thin margins. Every flower, every drop of nectar, exists within a carefully timed cycle that determines whether native pollinators can feed, reproduce, and survive. Overloading the system with additional pollinators would create instant competition, straining the already limited resources and forcing native bees to scramble for survival. Studies on non-native honeybees provide a glimpse into the danger. When introduced to new regions, they often dominate flowers, removing far more pollen than native species can access. This disrupts reproductive cycles for plants and reduces the food available to species perfectly adapted to the environment. In a desert, where blooms appear briefly after rare rainfalls, such an imbalance could ripple through the ecosystem, affecting generations of pollinators that rely on precise timing. Not all bees would suffer equally. Ground-nesting species often operate on slightly different schedules or occupy specific ecological niches, allowing them to avoid direct competition, at least temporarily. Yet even these adaptations have limits. Desert blooms and water sources are finite. A sudden influx of pollinators could exhaust them before native species complete their essential work. Survival becomes a gamble measured in hours, days, or the few fleeting weeks when conditions are favorable. Carrying capacity is a concept rarely appreciated outside ecological circles. The desert does not tolerate abundance for the sake of abundance. Its ability to support bees depends on bloom cycles, rainfall, and temperatures that vary unpredictably from year to year. Exceed that limit, and even the hardiest species may falter. Adding millions of bees is not just dramatic, it could overwrite the delicate timing that has evolved over centuries, turning a balanced system into one under pressure from every angle. The real shock lies not in whether some bees would survive. A few would endure, taking shelter, finding blooms, and persisting despite the odds. The startling truth is how little margin exists before disruption spreads across the ecosystem. Each plant, each nest, each pollinator depends on a fragile choreography of time and resource availability. There is no buffer, no safety net, and no easy way to correct mistakes once introduced at scale. These insights frame the viral story in a new light. The notion of millions of bees vanishing in a desert suddenly becomes less about spectacle and more about understanding the extreme limits of the environment. The desert's hidden rules, the timing of blooms, and the scarcity of resources reveal why such an idea captures the imagination. Science shows that the desert is alive but unforgiving, and that reality, far more than rumor, is where the true lessons about survival and fragility can be found. This leads to the final question. What truth underlies the viral storytelling, and why does it resonate so strongly with audiences worldwide? The real shock. The story of millions of bees vanishing in the Nevada desert captured attention because it taps into a deeper fear. Across the world, pollinators are declining, and with them, the ecosystems that rely on them. People see these viral videos and feel a surge of anxiety, imagining entire systems collapsing in an instant. The narrative resonates because it mirrors real-world uncertainties, reminding us that the survival of small creatures can carry consequences far beyond their size. Scientific investigation paints a far more complex picture than any simplified release experiment. Deserts are not empty stages for dramatic interventions. They are intricate networks of timing, adaptation, and delicate balance. Each plant blooms for only moments. Each pollinator emerges in response to cues embedded over generations, and every interaction has evolved to sustain life in a land where scarcity is the norm. Attempting to impose large-scale change on such a system would be reckless, and yet the viral story makes it seem almost inevitable. The contrast between myth and reality is where the fascination begins. The true revelation lies in understanding how fragile these desert webs are. Native bees, ground-nesting species, specialized pollinators, and the plants that depend on them all interact with precision. A single disruption can cascade through the network, affecting reproduction, survival, and the rhythm of life itself. Human misunderstanding mirrors ecological imbalance in a subtle but striking way. Rumors of massive bee releases evoke a spectacle, but the real spectacle is already present in nature. A desert ecosystem functioning with remarkable coordination and vulnerability. A system where timing, scarcity, and adaptation decide life or death for thousands of species. This understanding reframes how we think about ecological stories online. Viral myths often exaggerate danger, yet the anxiety they create reveals truths about human perception of nature. People sense fragility in the world around them, even if they cannot see it. The desert's reality, invisible to casual observation, is that life here depends on hidden processes, quietly maintaining balance while we assume emptiness. The more we learn about these processes, the more we realize that even small errors, such as introducing the wrong species, misjudging timing, or ignoring scarcity, can produce ripple effects no viral narrative could ever fully capture. There is no clear evidence that millions of bees were ever released into the Nevada desert, yet the idea persists, lingering in the space between rumor and belief. The real shock does not come from proving or disproving the event, but from recognizing what such a landscape demands to survive. If an experiment like this were ever carried out, the focus would quickly shift from disappearance to limits, revealing just how delicate, interconnected, and unforgiving the desert truly is. The story begins to fade when placed beside scientific understanding, but in that contrast, a deeper lesson emerges. Nature, especially in its harshest places, is far more intricate and fragile than we imagine, and every attempt to simplify it exposes how easily human assumptions unravel when faced with ecological reality. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.